Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike and Marty on the D. Mike and Marty. Mike and Marty.
Good morning, Rockingham and Bellows Falls, and welcome to the feed. It's Mike Smith and Marty Gallagher. Today we're here with Cynthia Moore. She's going to be telling us about an exciting project she's working on, helping businesses in the community recover some of the money they may have lost during the epidemic. But first, Marty with
Local events. So at the Bellows Falls Opera House this week is A Man Called Otto. It starts on the 27th and runs through the 31st. And I've heard pretty good reviews.
Yeah, Tom Hanks. It's
I love
supposed to be
Tom
very
Hanks.
good.
I love him no matter what. So if there's Tom Hanks in it, I'm there. Tonight is the classic movie night. And even though the weather's not going to be perfect, I think you should get in your car and go because it's Mamma Mia. And what better place on a snowy, icky night but to be watching the movie Mamma Mia because of the scenery and it's in Greece and the whole bit. That is sponsored by Greater Falls Insurance. Just reminding everybody that the first of the Ray Masuko concert series is starting. It's going to happen on Saturday, February 4th. It's Dar Williams, and her special guest is Chris Matthews. So those tickets are on sale at the Bellows Falls Opera House website. It's super easy to reserve your seats. And as I said last week, seats are starting to fill up. And I think that these concert series will probably all sell out because they're all of the most popular artists from Ray's era.
Right. And it's coming up fast.
It is coming up fast, I know.
January's been
It's like,
180 days long, but February is right around the corner.
It has been the longest January. You're not kidding. And all of a sudden, right, we're going to go through February. Exactly. But when we get through February and we get into March, the last 2 weeks of March, March 24th, 25th, 26th, 30th, 31st, and then April 1st are the nights that you're going to be able to go to the Bellows Falls Opera House and see the Wild Goose Players production of Urinetown.
That sounds good.
Just the name alone should make you want to go see the movie.
Yeah.
It's not the movie, the play. I've seen they've been showing some pictures of the scenery
set.
and the set, and as usual, it is a phenomenal looking set. They have Wild Goose Players and the folks that help them. They have a big strong contingency of volunteers, has got set making down to a science. They just do a beautiful job. And speaking of Wild Goose Players, and speaking of Rotary, we're going to ask everybody to save the date, Saturday, June 10th. We are doing a Bellows Falls Festival. It's going to be a music festival, not exactly like Roots, as you can see from the kind of Monterey, Woodstocky look of our logo. We want it to just be a fun music festival down at the Waypoint Center. We're looking to book 4 or 5 bands. We'll have some food trucks. Just looking to have another summer music series event that you can come to. That's an outdoor music series. So we're just asking people to save the date right now, put it on your calendar, and then we'll be getting as our plans evolve, we'll be sharing the information about who's playing and all of those details.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So Cynthia came to a Rotary a few weeks ago and was talking about the Federal Employment Retention Tax Credit Program. Just those many words in a row are intimidating. So,
Scare people. I like to call it Operation Fairy Godmother. Actually.
That sounds better. I saw that in the article, and I think that sounds much more. How did you fall into this?
Well, so I was the executive director at Sojourn's Community Clinic. I had been there for 19 years, and I think the last 17 I was executive director. And during the pandemic, we, like everyone else, were really struggling. We pivoted to do telemedicine right away, but we had an incredible drop in revenue. And so I was really on top of all of the programs that were available. And one of them that came up was this thing called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. And I'm pretty sure that I learned about it on January 6th. Because I was talking to our CPA about it when we heard about the Capitol being stormed. And it sounded like an amazing program. It basically, the simple way of explaining it is that it's a credit against wages paid to people that didn't lay everyone off. So employers that were impacted by COVID but continued to maintain a payroll. So it's kind of a misnomer to say tax credit, but it's a refund from the IRS against wages that were paid despite being impacted by COVID. So I was able to obtain those funds for Sojourns in my capacity of executive director and CFO, and thought that was great. And when I left Sojourns in February, I was not planning to do this work, but I had a couple of people contact me to say, yeah, I know you're not wanting to do this work, but you're really good with finance. Can you come help us? Can you help us set up our financial systems, or can you help us with some accounting? And this is for a couple of different nonprofits. And in each case, I discovered that they hadn't applied for this money. And I was sort of astonished. And so I did my research and discovered that just like any other tax return, you can amend your tax return and claim it retroactively. And so I started doing that for my people that I was helping. And then I said, well, if they didn't do it, who else didn't do it? And so I started putting the word out. I had a friend who was on the board of a humane society up north, and I said, could you check and see if they did it? And they hadn't, and I was able to get them quite a bit of money. And so that made me contact Windham County Humane Society and say, can I help you? And then I sent a letter out to everyone I knew who was on the board of an organization I cared about, and I started getting more and more clients. And then what I charge very little to do this, but part of what I do ask is that people tell everyone they know, because my goal is to help as many nonprofits as possible before the deadline comes.
And you have a monetary goal.
I do. My original goal was $5 million, to bring $5 million into Windham and Windsor County with this money. I'm actually creeping up on $3 million already, and the word has really only been out for 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So I'm tentatively thinking we might be talking more like 10 million.
That's awesome.
It's not limited to this area, but my focus is here. My goal definitely remains 5 million in Windham and Windsor counties. And like I said, I'm already up to almost 3 million.
So,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
what is the typical, like, a profile of the person or group that you're helping?
Okay, so in order to qualify for employee retention tax credit, you have to have maintained a payroll. So if you had like I got a call recently from someone, or I contacted someone, and they were an all volunteer organization, so I can't help them. So they had to have continued paying people, and then they were impacted by COVID in one of two ways. There's two paths to qualify. One is that they had what's considered a significant reduction in gross receipts compared to the same quarter pre-pandemic. So we compare to 2019. So we look at their 2020. This all started in March of 2020. So we start with calendar quarter 2 usually of 2020, and we compare with that same quarter in 2019. And we do that all the way through third quarter of 2021. And in 2020, you needed to have a quarter that was 50% below the same quarter in 2019. It's very common. People shut down in April, and they had a huge plunge. So one way, the easiest way to do it, that's very straightforward, is did you financially have a significant reduction in gross receipts? The second way is that if you were shut down and you had either a full or partial shutdown by government mandate, then even if you pivoted and were able to, find a way to make revenue, if the part of your business that was shut down had been a significant part before the pandemic, then you qualify. So, for example, some of the theaters that I'm working with, or museums, or churches, they couldn't, Governor Scott's Stay Safe, Stay Home mandate prohibited non-essential businesses from doing in-person business.
Right.
So you couldn't go to church.
Mhm.
And so
They couldn't collect money in church. Or
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So those
Yeah.
are the two
Oh, that's
things.
good, yeah.
So it can be any size organization. There are different rules for organizations over 100 people. But, even some of the little ones that have like 3 employees, I've been able to bring in $50,000 for them,
Right.
which is game-changing money. It's based on how large your
Mhm.
payroll is.
Now, what about if people got PPPs?
That's great. I'm glad they got PPP. It makes it more complicated for me to do my job. PPP, shuttered venue, and restaurant recovery do not count towards the gross receipts test. However, you can't use the same money twice. So if they got a PPP, let's say their PPP was typically for 2.5 months of payroll. So let's say in the quarter, which is 3 months, their payroll was $100,000 and they got $80,000 in PPP. I can only count 20,000. So you either would get 70% of that 20,000 probably in 2021 or 50% in 2020. So we just have to back it out, which makes my work more complicated,
Right.
but it doesn't mean you can't
Recover
get it.
that money, yeah.
Yeah, you just don't get to count those same wages twice.
Mhm.
What I find actually fascinating is I felt I was pretty up on all of the things that became available during COVID. I was watching a lot of webinars and
Mhm.
trying to stay real. And I never had even heard of it. And
Yeah.
it sounds like it came out pretty early on.
Yeah, as I said, I think it was January 6th, but I'm not sure. I know that's when I was talking to my accountant, or the CPA for Sojourns, and I remember her saying, "Oh my God, this is game changing for our community."
that's-
Mhm.
And the feedback that I've gotten from almost everyone, either directly or in the way they meet me, is that it's so complicated.
Yeah.
They just said, "Oh my God, I can't deal with this. It's too complicated." And also the name being Employee Retention Tax Credit makes people think that it's a credit against the tax they pay.
Yeah.
Because they're a nonprofit, they didn't pay tax. And that's not what it is. It's actually a refund against wages paid.
Well, then
That's
why,
a really
why
good
didn't they
point.
just
Yeah.
call it that?
Well, because they probably didn't want everyone to take it. I mean, it is
Exactly.
very lucrative. It is the most. I mean, Paycheck Protection was great, but this could, for a shuttered venue, for example, they could qualify for up to 5 quarters. And in 2020, there's a limit. You only count the first $10,000 of wages or qualified health expenses per employee. So the max credit for 2020 is $5,000 per employee. But for 2021, it is 70% of up to $10,000 in wages per quarter. So there's a potential of $21,000 per employee in 2021 and $5,000 in
Wow.
2020.
That is
So it is.
game-changing.
I mean,
Mhm.
if you had 10 employees that all made over $40,000, let's say, then you would be eligible for $70,000 for that quarter. And you have that, and part of what, the other piece is some people think they knew everything about this, but it's actually very complicated and there's a lot of nuances. There's something called an alternative quarter, which means in 2021 you get to actually say your finances. Say the previous quarter you were 58% of the same quarter in 2019, but this quarter you're 90%. You actually get to claim this quarter as well because you get to look back to the previous one. So the IRS, in their typical fashion, have made this that your eligibility ends the quarter after the quarter in which you achieve whatever the
It's
so
all
a lot of
right.
people
Yeah.
so a lot of
My
people
eyes
are
are
leave
spinning now.
but the point is in the scenario I just told you is if you didn't know that you lost $70,000
Yeah.
because you only applied for the one quarter.
Mhm.
So a lot of places say, "Oh yeah, we did that," and I think, okay, I hope you did.
Yeah, yeah.
But did you know there's these nuances? So it's
So you're doing a great service because you're helping out and I'm not saying nothing bad about not-for-profit organizations, but they typically don't attract financial wizards.
Nerds, you mean?
Yes. Well, I was trying to be nice, but
Yeah.
people who want to
Yeah.
help out and do things,
Yeah.
they're attracted to being on the boards,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's not somebody who may be in so deep in the weeds in this stuff
Right.
that you understand it.
I mean, part of what happened for me is that I maybe I'm naive and optimistic, but I thought, wow, they're creating this program. It's to save places like us.
I think it was.
And so surely it must apply to us, not just to the Kardashians
Mhm,
and Tom
mhm.
Brady. So let me look at this and let me really understand
Right.
it. And then when I realized, I mean, I just don't want those nonprofits to leave that money on the table.
Well, just to further what Mike said, oftentimes in a nonprofit, you have one or two people that are trying to do all of the jobs. You don't have, you oftentimes in a small nonprofit,
Yeah.
you don't have a development director or someone specifically for finance, someone specifically for you're trying
I'm
to do
laughing
everything.
because I was all those people in my executive director role. I had a CFO, and I had a CEO, and everyone that dealt with everything to do with the medicine and the practice management. But I did do all of the finance and all that.
And so
But,
it's
you know.
sometimes things can, you think you're keeping up, or it's just so complicated that you're like, you don't even realize what you're not realizing. You don't
Yeah.
even realize what you're leaving on the table.
Yeah.
So what have you found that's happened? And I want to bring this up because you did talk about it. What's happened since you started doing this that you found out that people are getting calls?
Oh, yeah. So I had known about this before. I started getting calls even before I had left Sojourns in February of last year. But all of these companies have sprouted up that provide this service for you for the very reasonable, and I'm being facetious, fee of 15 or more percent. And so people are even getting robocalls now. But this is a very lucrative business because some of the paydays are very large, but people are getting intimidating calls with what I consider to be predatory practices. And some of them, I got one at one of the places where I contract that said if you qualify, if you even had to wear a mask at work, you qualify. I mean, so they're giving misinformation, they're charging predatory rates, and they're using actually kind of intimidating practices. And that was part of why I really wanted to do this, to be like, oh my goodness.
And I can actually speak to that. We were talking about it. So literally, I wouldn't have known if you hadn't come to Rotary and spoke on it. I probably would have been on this conversation forever with this person. I got a phone call yesterday at work asking for someone that didn't work there, and I said, well, no, can I help you? This is a very important legal matter, and I can only speak to the person in charge. He said, well, you are speaking to the person in charge. So then he introduced himself, and he started talking about the program, and he said, I'm positive you qualify. And I said, no, I know I don't qualify. I know for a fact I don't qualify because we didn't have a drop in revenue based upon the conversation. He said, nope, there's been some changes. I'm going to turn you over to our specialists. And when you answer the phone and someone tells you that they're from a law office and they want to speak to you about legal matters, it's very, I should have actually, if I'd had the time, I might have played for a little while and see how far I could get into the misinformation, but I didn't have the time. So I just thanked him politely and hung up. But if I didn't know, I probably would have been on that phone call and might have,
It's really unfortunate because it's part of why I think some people aren't contacting me because they think it's a scam.
So actually, before we do get to low in time, what is the best way to contact you? There should be a contact page that comes up.
The best way to contact me is to email. That is fine. Cynthia Moore Consulting at gmail.com is great. That's perfect.
Okay. We always
I have another one.
Sure
I have another one
that's
that's Cynthia at VermontERC.com, but this is perfect.
I just took it off the business card.
Yeah.
So we just always
Yeah.
want to make sure we get the contact information out
perfect.
when
Right.
it's important like
Yeah,
this.
and I am committed to helping every nonprofit that I can. We have a deadline. It's a rolling
good point.
deadline. So you had 3 years. You have 3 years to amend a tax return, and the tax returns we're amending are called the 941, which is your payroll tax, your quarterly payroll tax return. And so the first quarter you possibly could have been eligible for would have been Q2 of 2020. which ended in June 30th, so you probably filed in July. So we have until July of this year for that first quarter. But then every quarter we keep going, and the last time will be October of 2024.
Okay.
So we
So you
have
yeah,
time.
some time.
And 2021 is the year that is where the big money is. Yeah, and everyone's struggling. So even these small amounts, relatively small amounts, make a big difference.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
And again, if people do this and they're getting a tax credit, but is it a tax credit or is it a check for money?
It's a check.
Yeah.
It's a check.
So I think
Yeah.
just making that
Yeah.
clear so that
Yeah.
someone's thinking, oh, that's just a tax credit, then it's
No,
a check
they get an
for
actual
money.
check for big money. Often, in the case of the people I'm working with, 6 figures.
Wow.
And it's unrestricted, correct?
Absolutely.
Which
It's just-
in
it's just
nonprofit
money.
world is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, so I just want to speak to that a little bit because this is not just available to nonprofits, it's available to any business. The complication is that if you're a for-profit business, the IRS has said that if you get employee retention tax credit, you need to refile your tax return for the period that you're getting the credit for. Because let's say in 2020 you said your employment expenses were 100,000 and now you get 100,000 in ERC. So
That
actually
changes.
it was 200,000 and you might owe tax on that extra 100,000 that you just made, and penalties could start. So you need to refile your 1040, and then you need to talk to your CPA about whether you want to start paying that tax right now. And so it gets complicated. For a 990, well, for a nonprofit, they file a 990, which is technically called an informational return. And so it's unclear, honestly, whether they need to refile that 990, but they
Okay.
won't owe additional tax regardless. So what I'm recommending to my clients is talk to your CPA. Once the money has arrived, which can take between 8 and 16 months at this point for the money to arrive because of the backlog, maybe refile your 990, and then your CPA will also want to restate the financial statements for the period, but you don't have to do anything till the money's here.
That's just,
So-
I mean, I think, like you said, game changer for a lot of local, small nonprofits that
Yeah.
really have struggled.
Yeah.
And
That's great.
so I just find it interesting. So when you retired, you had a whole other idea for a career path. and-
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to do something completely different, but I really enjoy working with numbers. After managing people who I loved every single one of them, but after managing people for 20 years, it's really nice
Numbers
to
are
work with
more
numbers.
predictable.
Just for at least a while.
Are you finding, even though you explain it, are you still finding some skepticism in people?
I find skepticism and it's very important to me that the people that sign the returns understand what they're signing. I would never sign something I didn't understand. And what I find is math phobia is a problem.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
people,
yeah.
this is complicated and it's a little bit boring until you get to see the number. And so sometimes people don't follow or engage, and that's and so they don't really believe it's going to happen, and they don't get it, or it's over their heads or whatever. I mean, I've asked for testimonials from various people, and they almost all talk about how it was too complicated.
I would be interested in the testimonials because it would be
Yeah.
good. To me, this is an amazing process and a great thing to be doing, but I'm not exactly sure if people who are watching our show are going to say, oh, I could do that, because, or I know my not-for-profit could do that.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't have an easy way of saying, hey, guys, this works, and come on in.
Right. Well, I do have testimonials. The Reformer did an article about me recently. If you Google fairy godmother
Mm-hmm.
and the Reformer, you get that, and it included at least one of the testimonials, I
Just hold it
think.
up. I probably can't really see it, but there's the picture.
It has
Have a
my
cute
sidekick
dog.
with
Your
me.
sidekick, yes. Your assistant, office assistant.
Yeah, and they can also talk to their CPAs or their accountants. Other people do this. I just would love for people to not go for these predatory people that are
Right,
paying too
exactly.
much. But what I would really love is for everybody who sees this, if you have a nonprofit you love, whether it's a church or a theater or a museum or a healthcare facility, please spread the word.
Right.
Help me get this money into this community.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
that literally is the perfect ending because we are out of time.
Yes.
Perfect.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on
Maybe,
and talking about this because
yeah.
I think I'm hoping that people take advantage of it and give you a call.
I hope
And-
they take
and the-
advantage of it too.
Didn't realize we were going to be beeping this
I
much.
know, that's the
but,
problem. All right.
That's it for this week, and we'll see you next week on the feed.
Bye, community.
Goodbye.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike and Mike.